Before we begin, I just want to say thank you for being here and to let you know how you can get in contact with the show. If you'd like to share your thoughts on this episode, suggest a case or request a shout out, you can find What They Hide Hidden Crimes in Plain Sight on social media. You can follow and message the podcast on X and Blue Sky. Just search at What They Hide Pod on both. You can also email the show directly, whattheyhidepod@gmail.com. The details will be in the episode description. I read every message and I really appreciate you taking the time to reach out. Okay, let's crack on with the show. August the 4th, 2002, Soham, Cambridgeshire, England. It was one of those evenings that feels suspended in gold light, the kind that stretches a little longer than expected. Windows open, televisions humming in the background, the smell of cut grass hanging in the air. Jessica Chapman and Holly Wells were 10-year-olds. Best friends. The kind of friendship that is inseparable, where one name is rarely spoken without the other. Holly and Jessica, Jessica and Holly. That afternoon, someone took a photograph. Two girls standing side by side, matching Manchester United shirts, smiling, hair brushed, faces lit with uncomplicated childhood. That photograph would circle the world. But in that moment, it was just a picture before going out. Around 6:15 p.m, the girls left home. They told their parents they were going to buy sweets. They weren't running away. They weren't defying curfew. They were walking a familiar route, through streets they had walked dozens of times before, past houses they recognised, in a town where people waved from front gardens, where parents felt comfortable letting children roam short distances in pairs. That comfort's important, because this story fractures it. They were seen on CCTV, walking together, talking, carefree. They passed the local secondary school, Soham Village College, and near the caretaker's house, they paused. Someone would later report seeing them there, outside a door that belonged to a man trusted with keys to the school, a man embedded in the community, Ian Huntley. No one panicked at 7 p.m. No one panicked at 8 p.m. Children sometimes linger. Time stretches differently in summer, but by nightfall, unease began settling in. Phones were called, friends checked with friends, parents retraced routes. The streets that had felt warm hours earlier now felt wrong. By midnight, police were notified, and a small town concern became something else. The search began immediately. Officers walked fields with flashlights, neighbours joined in, helicopters lifted into the night sky. Names echoed across farmland. Holly! Jessica! The fields answered with silence. Here's what makes this case so devastating. There was no warning, no stranger in a van, no obvious threat. The last known sighting was not in some shadowed corner of town. It was outside a house belonging to a school employee, a caretaker, a man who fixed doors, who unlocked classrooms, who lived within walking distance of where the girls played. That proximity is what unsettles, because danger, in this story, did not arrive from outside. It was already there. In the hours that followed, Ian Huntley would speak to police. He would say the girls had come to his door briefly. He would say they left unharmed. He would stand in front of cameras, appeal for their safe return, his voice calm, concerned, measured, and the country would listen. Because at that point, he was not a suspect. He was a witness. 2 10-year-old girls walked out for sweets on a summer evening. They never came home. And in the days that followed, the entire nation would learn something uncomfortable. Safety is often assumed. Trust is often given. And sometimes, the most devastating harm does not come from strangers in the dark. It comes from someone who already holds the keys. This is what they hide. And tonight's episode is Ian Huntley and the Soham murders. This episode contains discussion of child abduction, murder, and the death of children, as well as references to sexual misconduct and obstruction of justice. The themes are deeply distressing and may be upsetting for some listeners. Listener discretion is strongly advised. In the Wells household, it was an ordinary Sunday. Holly had spent most of the day with Jessica. They'd been inseparable for years. Same school, same friends, same jokes. They didn't just share interests, they shared identity. If one was invited, the other came too. If one laughed, the other was already laughing. Their families knew this. They were used to it. Earlier that afternoon, the girls had stood in the kitchen getting ready to go out. They changed into matching red Manchester United shirts. There was no deeper meaning, just two friends wanting to look the same. Holly's hair was brushed neatly, Jessica's too. They posed for a photo, smiling, relaxed. No one looking at that image could have imagined it would become the last photograph taken of them alive. At around 6:15 p.m, the girls left the house. Just going to get sweets. It was a short walk, a familiar route. Their parents didn't hesitate. Why would they? Soham was not known for danger. It was known for routine. For neighbours who recognised each other's cars. For school events and church gatherings. For fields and quiet roads. Trust is built in places like that, and trust is fragile. By 7 p.m. there was no alarm. Summer evenings stretch long. Children lose track of time. Parents assume one more stop, one more chat. But as the light faded, unease crept in. Phones were picked up, calls made. Have you seen them? No. At first it was inconvenience, then concern, then something colder. In the Chapman household, similar calls were happening. Where are they? Did they say they were going somewhere else? Did they stop by a friend's house? No. The answers were always the same. No. There is a specific moment in every missing person case when worry turns into fear. It's not loud, it's quiet. It happens when explanations stop feeling plausible, when the mind starts replaying the last conversation, the last sight, the last words. For Holly and Jessica's parents, that moment came late in the evening. Police were called, and once the police arrive, the world shifts. Because now it is not just family searching, it is official, documented, serious. Officers began canvassing the area, knocking on doors, asking neighbours, checking CCTV. Volunteers gathered quickly, friends, strangers, farmers offering fields for search. Soham mobilised. The town that felt safe hours earlier now felt exposed. Imagine standing at your front window as darkness settles, watching police lights flash softly at the end of the road, listening for footsteps that don't come. The mind does something cruel in these moments. It runs through every possible scenario: minor injury, lost track of time, phone battery dead, and then scenarios too frightening to name. Sleep becomes impossible. Time stretches. Every car that slows near the house makes the heart pump. Every phone vibration feels monumental. Holly's mother would later describe those hours as surreal, as if reality had shifted slightly out of place, as if the world was continuing, but she was not inside it anymore. Jessica's family experienced the same suspended state. Two households, connected by friendship, now connected by dread. By morning, news had spread, posters printed, photos distributed, two smiling faces under the words "missing." Volunteers searched hedgerows, helicopters scanned fields, national media began arriving. Reporters stood on pavements that had never seen camera crews before. The photograph of the two girls in matching shirts appeared everywhere, on television, on front pages, in shop windows. It became an image the entire country recognised. And through all of this, the families waited. Waiting is the hardest part, not knowing, holding on to hope because the alternative is unbearable. Every knock at the door could be news, good or devastating. You don't brace for bad news, you brace for anything. Amid the search, Ian Huntley spoke to the media. He said the girls had come to his door briefly that evening. He said they left unharmed. He appeared cooperative, concerned. In the early days, he was not a villain in the story, he was a potential witness. And that matters, because the families, like everyone else, were trying to piece together the last known movements. They were grasping for information, any information. Trust is extended easily when fear is overwhelming. As days passed without discovery, hope thinned. But hope never fully disappears. Parents cling to it, even when statistics whisper otherwise. They replay conversations, they think, maybe they're somewhere safe, maybe someone is helping them, maybe this will end with relief. And that hope is what makes what follows so devastating. Two 10-year-old girls left home for sweets on a warm August evening. Their families expected them back before dark. Instead, they entered a nightmare that would alter not just their lives, but the country's understanding of trust. Because when the truth began to surface, it would not involve a faceless stranger from outside town. It would involve someone who lived within walking distance. Someone connected to the school. Someone ordinary. And that realisation would fracture Soham in a way it has never fully recovered from. As the search for Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman widened beyond Soham, something else expanded with it. The photograph. The two girls, standing shoulder to shoulder, matching red Manchester United shirts. Beckham, 7. The image moved faster than the police helicopters. It appeared on television screens across Britain, on front pages, on missing person posters taped inside petrol stations and supermarket windows. The red was bright, hopeful, unmistakably childhood. At 10 years old, David Beckham wasn't just a footballer. He was a symbol, precision, fame, glamour, safety. Children wore his name like armour. Holly and Jessica had dressed to match that evening because that's what best friends do. They align, they coordinate, they exist as a pair. The shirts were never meant to carry meaning, they were meant for fun. But as the days passed and the girls did not return, those shirts become something else. They become the visual shorthand for innocence. And as the image spread, another image spread with it. Ian Huntley, standing outside his home, speaking to reporters, calm, measured, cooperative. He said the girls had knocked on his front door that Sunday evening. He said they asked about a missing football shirt. He said he had spoken to them briefly. He said they left unharmed. He stood beneath the same sky the search helicopters were scanning. He spoke while the red-shirted photograph looped on news broadcasts behind him. Two parallel visuals. The smiling girls in Beckham shirts, the caretaker explaining timelines. And in that pairing something unsettling was forming, though no one yet knew it. As the nation watched the image of the girls in Manchester United shirts, David Beckham saw it too. He publicly expressed concern, said he hoped they would be found safe, said he was thinking of their families. It was a small statement, but it bridged something powerful. The world of elite sport and the quiet streets of Soham suddenly intersected. Millions who might not have known the town now knew the girls, because they wore his name. The red shirts amplified the reach of the story, and as the search continued, the image became impossible to ignore. While the country searched fields and waterways, Ian Huntley did not retreat. He stepped toward the media. He appeared more than once, each time composed, each time recounting the same essential claim. They came to my door, they left. I don't know what happened after. His tone did not waver. He did not appear evasive. In fact, he appeared helpful. There is something psychologically complex about this moment, because the same broadcast that showed the girls smiling in their football shirts also showed the man who would later be convicted of their murders. And at the time, viewers saw no contradiction. They saw a witness, a concerned local man, a school caretaker embedded in the community. Trust filled the space where suspicion had not yet grown. Soham residents watched these interviews like the rest of the country. Some later said they felt uneasy. Others saw nothing unusual. That's the power of normal presentation. When someone stands in daylight and speaks calmly, we interpret that as transparency. When someone engages openly with reporters, we assume innocence. Huntley remained visible, and visibility in those early days shielded him. As days passed, police interviews intensified. Statements were reviewed, timelines reconstructed, small inconsistencies began appearing, details shifted subtly, but outwardly Huntley maintained composure. He remained in the narrative, still explaining, still answering, still part of the public story. And all the while the red shirts remained on screens across the country, a constant reminder of who was missing. When the girls' bodies were discovered near RAF Lakenheath on August the 17th, the emotional shift was immediate. Hope collapsed into grief. The Red Man United shirts no longer symbolised fandom, they symbolised loss. The image that once carried optimism now carried finality. David Beckham later invited the families privately to a Manchester United match, met them, spoke with them, offered condolences, not as spectacle, but as solidarity. The shirts had connected the story to millions, and now they connected grief just as widely. With confirmation of death, investigative focus sharpened. Police revisited Huntley's media statements. Forensic evidence contradicted parts of his account. His car, his movements, burn evidence, fibres. The composed caretaker who'd stood in front of cameras was now under arrest. The emotional whiplash for the public was profound, because they had watched him speak, they had heard his voice, They had seen him positioned against the same backdrop as the missing girl's image. The proximity between performance and truth was almost unbearable. While the country stared at two smiling girls in matching Beckham shirts, Ian Huntley stood under studio lights. While David Beckham expressed hope, Huntley repeated timelines. While millions held on to belief, he controlled the narrative as long as he could. And that is what lingers. Not just what happened, but how easily it sat within view. The photograph and the interviews, the innocence and the performance, side by side on the same screen. Hidden crimes in plain sight. In the early days of the investigation, Ian Huntley was not the centre of the storm. He was one of many. A local voice, a man who had seen the girls briefly, cooperative, available, present. But investigations are not built on impressions, they're built on timelines. And timelines, when pressed hard enough, begin to reveal strain. Police interviewed Huntley multiple times in the days after the girls disappeared. At first the questions were routine. When did you last see them? What did they say? How long were they there? His answers were consistent, mostly. He said the girls knocked at his door around 6:30 p.m. He said they asked about a missing football shirt. He said they left shortly after. He said he watched them walk away. But as officers began mapping the timeline against CCTV footage and witness statements, something didn't sit cleanly. Small details shifted, times moved by minutes, then by more. Investigators know that trauma can distort memory, but they also know that rehearsed stories sometimes shift at the edges, and the edges were beginning to fray. Attention turned to Huntley's Ford Fiesta. Witnesses had reported seeing a car matching its description near the area where the bodies would later be found. Police began tracing vehicles' movements, traffic cameras, petrol stations, rural roads. The search radius expanded. The idea forming inside the investigation team was no longer just, what if he knows more? It was becoming, what if he was there? Forensic teams began examining Huntley's home and vehicle. At this stage, suspicion had not yet been declared publicly, but inside the investigation, focus was narrowing. Clothing fibres, burnt items, attempts to clean, traces that do not disappear simply because someone wishes them to. Officers later described this stage as methodical. No dramatic breakthroughs, just accumulation, piece by piece, a mosaic forming. Huntley's media appearances were re-watched, not for emotion, but for consistency. Investigators compared his public statements to his police interviews. Where did details diverge? Where did phrasing change? Where did certainty soften? The calm caretaker, who had stood before cameras, now sat across interview tables under fluorescent lights. In interrogation rooms, composure can thin. Questions repeat. Timelines are reconstructed again and again. When did you leave the house? Where did you go? Why did you drive? What did you burn? What time exactly? Exact times matter, because exact times are harder to improvise. Maxine Carr had provided an alibi. She told police Huntley had been with her during crucial windows, but as pressure increased, that alibi weakened. Travel records, phone activity, witness accounts, small inconsistencies became structural ones. When alibis shift, investigators listen carefully, because alibis are either anchors or cracks, and this one was beginning to crack. On August the 17th, when the girls' bodies were discovered near RAF Lakenheath, the investigation shifted from missing persons to homicide, and that shift changes tone. Urgency sharpens, resources expand, forensics accelerate. Now the question was not where are they, it was who. And inside the incident room, one name appeared more frequently than others. Ian Huntley. Investigators suspected the girls had entered his home. They suspected something had happened inside that house. They suspected he had transported the bodies in his vehicle. They suspected he had attempted to destroy evidence by burning clothing. They suspected the confident public witness had been constructing a narrative while the search unfolded. But suspicion is not enough. It requires corroboration, and corroboration was coming. When police moved to arrest Huntley, it was not theatrical, it was procedural. Controlled officers entered. He was detained. He did not erupt. He did not flee. The caretaker who had stood in front of cameras was now in custody, and for the first time, the performance ended. Under sustained questioning, his account shifted again. He began introducing alternative explanations. He suggested one girl had died accidentally. He suggested panic. He suggested fear. He suggested he had not intended what followed. But investigators had already built their timeline. Vehicle movements, forensic traces, burn evidence, contradictions. The mosaic was no longer abstract. It had shape. For the investigation team, there is a moment, rarely dramatic, when certainty settles. Not emotional certainty, evidential certainty. When independent threads align, when physical evidence matches behavioural inconsistency, when geography matches timeline, when narrative collapses under detail. That moment had arrived. The man who had calmly addressed reporters while the nation watched red Manchester United shirts on their screens was no longer a witness. He was the accused. The net did not close with shouting. It closed with paperwork, with lab results, with maps, with quiet rooms and repeated questions. And when it closed, it revealed something deeply unsettling. The face the country had watched on television had been speaking from inside the truth the entire time. There is another name in this story. Maxine Carr. At the time of the murders, she was 25 years old, a classroom assistant at Soham Village College, trusted around children, working inside the same educational environment as Ian Huntley. She lived with him, shared his home, shared his routines, shared his version of events. In the early days of the investigation, Carr told police that Huntley had been with her at specific times on the night the girls disappeared. The statement supported his timeline. She repeated it, calmly, firmly, and at that moment there was no reason to doubt her. She appeared composed, cooperative, another local voice trying to help. But as forensic timelines tightened, her alibi became unstable. Phone records, witness accounts, work shifts, small inconsistencies began appearing, and inconsistencies in alibis are like cracks in glass. They spread. When Huntley was arrested, Carr was arrested too. Not for murder, but for perverting the course of justice, for not only providing a false alibi. In court, the prosecution argued that she lied to protect him, that she maintained the false timeline during police questioning, that her deception delayed the investigation. Carr denied knowing about the murders. She maintained that she believed Huntley's version of events. The jury ultimately convicted her of perverting the course of justice. She was sentenced to 42 months in prison. She served 21. Here is where the story becomes more complicated. Was Maxine Carr complicit in violence? No. There was no evidence she participated in the murders. The court did not find that, but she lied, and the question that lingered was why. Was it fear, loyalty, denial, shock, or a desperate attempt to believe the person she lived with could not have done what was accused of? In high-profile crimes, proximity can distort judgment. When someone you love is accused of something unimaginable, the mind resists. Sometimes fiercely. Carr later claimed she was manipulated, that Huntley lied to her, that she believed him. Whether the jury believed that entirely is another matter. But what is clear is this: her lie became part of the delay, and delay in missing person cases carries weight. Public anger toward Maxine Carr was intense. In some ways she became the face of betrayal alongside Huntley, perhaps because she worked in a school, perhaps because she appeared composed, or perhaps because it was easier to direct anger towards visible figures. After her release, she was given lifelong anonymity, a rare legal measure in the UK, because threats against her were credible, her identity protected, not out of sympathy, but out of security. Maxine Carr's role in this story is not one of direct violence. It is one of obstruction, of loyalty placed above truth, of a false alibi that slowed clarity. And in crimes like this, even obstruction leaves shadow. She was not the architect of harm, but she stood beside it, and for a time she shielded it. In the end, the court drew a clear line. Ian Huntley committed the murders. Maxine Carr lied to protect him. 2 different crimes, 2 different sentences. But in the narrative of Soham, her name remains tethered to his, because proximity to darkness leaves its own mark. Next, we step into the courtroom, where evidence replaced speculation, and where the country learned not just what happened, but how close it had been to seeing it sooner. The trial of Ian Huntley began in November 2003 at the Old Bailey, London, far from the quiet streets of Soham, but the weight of Soham filled the room. Every bench occupied, media from across the world, families seated apart from the man accused of killing their daughters. Ian Huntley entered the dock. No television cameras this time, no microphones on the pavement, just fluorescent lighting and scrutiny. He was charged with the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, 2 counts, 2 10-year-old girls. The prosecution alleged that on the evening of August 4th, 2002, the girls entered Huntley's home, that he killed them there, that he transported their bodies in his car, that he attempted to burn their clothing. The defence did not deny he was present. They denied intent. Huntley claimed one girl had died accidentally, that he panicked, that the second died as a consequence of his fear. The courtroom listened, but the courtroom required proof. Forensic experts testified. Fibres recovered from Huntley's car matched the girl's clothing. Burn marks suggested attempts to destroy evidence. Witnesses placed his vehicle near RAF Lakenheath around the time police believed the bodies were moved. His statements to police were dissected, minute by minute. When did you leave? Why did you drive? Why did your timeline change? Jurors listened as interview transcripts were read aloud. The calm television voice contrasted with the shift in police statements. It became clear his narrative had evolved. An evolution in testimony can signal construction. The courtroom was not only about evidence, it was about absence. The girls' families sat meters away from the man accused. There were no smiling photographs now, no red Manchester United shirts, just legal procedure, measured language, controlled emotion. Holly's mother later described the experience as reliving the nightmare in slow motion. Jessica's father described the unbearable weight of hearing forensic detail, where there should have been school stories. Justice requires exposure, but exposure is painful. Observers noticed Huntley's demeanour, composed, occasionally writing notes, at times appearing detached. No visible collapse, no dramatic apology. He maintained that the deaths were accidental, that panic drove his actions. But panic does not explain transportation. It does not explain burning clothes. It does not explain false alibis. The prosecution argued that his actions after the killings demonstrated consciousness of guilt, That concealment requires awareness, and awareness implies responsibility. On December the 17th, 2003, after weeks of testimony, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty. 2 counts of murder. The courtroom did not erupt, it inhaled. For the families there was no triumph, only confirmation. Confirmation that the man who had stood before cameras pleading concern had been responsible. The judge sentenced Ian Huntley to life imprisonment, a minimum term later set at 40 years. The man who held keys to classrooms would never walk free. But as the courtroom emptied, another question remained. How did he get there in the first place? Not to the dock, but to the school, to the role, to the access. Because the trial answered who, it did not fully answer how. In the months following the conviction, something deeply troubling emerged. Ian Huntley had a history. Allegations of sexual assault, reports from previous towns, complaints involving underage girls, none of which resulted in conviction. But they were recorded, somewhere, fragmented, scattered across different police forces, different databases, different jurisdictions, and that fragmentation mattered. At the time, police forces in England and Wales did not share intelligence seamlessly. Records in one country were not automatically visible in another. Concerns raised in Humberside did not necessarily follow Huntley to Cambridgeshire. When he applied for his caretaker position at Soham Village College, background checks were conducted, but the information held by Humberside police, including allegations and intelligence reports, was not properly disclosed. The school saw no red flags, because the red flags were buried in separate systems. In response, the government launched an independent public inquiry led by Sir Michael Burchard. Its task: examine how someone with Huntley's background was able to work in a school. The findings were damning. Humberside police had failed to properly record and act on allegations. Intelligence had not been shared effectively. Records were inconsistent. Warnings were not escalated. Opportunities were missed. Not once, but repeatedly. Here is what that means in human terms. Information existed, but it was siloed. Concerns were raised, but they were not connected. Patterns were visible, but only in pieces, and when pieces remain separate, no one sees the whole. The Burchard inquiry concluded that systemic failures allowed Huntley to slip through safeguarding processes, not because no one cared, but because systems were not designed to communicate fully. And in safeguarding, silence between systems can be catastrophic. The inquiry recommended sweeping reforms, improved police intelligence sharing, creation of a national IT system to track records across forces, stronger vetting for those working with children. What became known as the Disclosure and Barring Service evolved from these recommendations. The Soham murders reshaped safeguarding in the UK. But reform does not restore. It does not return 2 10-year-old girls. It does not give back summer evenings. It only prevents repetition. The devastation of this case lies in layers. The crime itself, the media presence, the courtroom confirmation. But beneath all of it, the knowledge that warning signs existed, that information was held, that dots were not connected. The system did not create Ian Huntley, but it failed to contain him, and that failure amplified the tragedy. In the end, the story of Soham is not just about one man. It's about fragmentation, about trust extended into institutions, about how normal roles, caretaker, classroom assistant, can mask risk when background systems fail. It is about the red shirts that became national symbols, about a man who stood in front of cameras while knowing the truth, and about a country forced to confront how easily harm can embed itself within the ordinary. When the cameras left Soham, the town did not return to what it was. Places never do. Grief settles differently in small communities. It lingers in streets, in classrooms, in silence. The fields where volunteers once searched did not change shape. The roads remained the same, but something invisible shifted. Because once innocence is fractured, it does not fully repair. For Holly Wells' family and Jessica Chapman's family, time split in two. Before August the 4th, 2002, and after. There is no returning to before. There are birthdays that arrive with absence, Christmases measured by who isn't at the table, school years that pass without report cards. The future does not unfold, it echoes. Every milestone is a reminder of the ones that will never come, driving lessons that will not happen, exams that will not be taken, careers that will never begin. The weight of what would they have been never lifts. The photograph of the girls in matching Manchester United shirts became memorial and memory. It appears each year in newspapers, anniversary articles, documentaries. It freezes them at 10, forever 10, smiling, unaware. And that is perhaps the cruelest element of violent crime involving children. Time moves forward for everyone else, but for them, it stops. Soham built memorials, held services, created spaces for reflection. But grief in a community is not contained to ceremony. It surfaces in unexpected moments, a familiar path walked differently, a school corridor that feels heavier, a generation of children who grew up hearing the names Holly and Jessica spoken softly. Parents in Soham would later describe a shift, a tightening, an instinct to watch more closely, to question more. Trust became something examined rather than assumed. That is legacy too. Across the country, the Soham murders changed how parents saw ordinary life. Sleepovers felt different. Short walks felt different. The role of schools felt different. Safeguarding language entered daily vocabulary. DBS checks, information sharing, background vetting. These phrases became part of normal conversation. The tragedy reshaped policy, but more than that, it reshaped perception. The Manchester United shirts endure as symbol, not because of football, but because of what they represent. Childhood joy, friendship, ordinariness. They were dressed for sweets, not history, and yet history claimed them. David Beckham's gesture of support, private, dignified, reminded the country that grief does not only belong to families. It radiates, it connects strangers, it humanises headlines, but gestures cannot undo, they can only acknowledge. There is something the news cycle does not show. The years after, the long quiet, the therapy sessions, the anniversaries that grow older while the girls do not, the slow process of living with memory. The parents have spoken at times about resilience, about ensuring their daughters are remembered not just for how they died, but for who they were. Funny, kind, bright, best friends. That is the legacy they protect. Not the crime, but the children. And there is an unsettling truth that remains. The man responsible is incarcerated. The systems were reformed, the lessons documented, but the absence remains permanent. Justice, in cases like this, is administrative. It closes a file. It does not close grief. The story of Soham is not just about murder. It's about trust. It's about how ordinary structures, schools, homes, neighbourhoods can feel safe until they're not. Ian Huntley did not hide in darkness. He hid in employment. He hid in familiarity. He hid in the assumption that systems were working. And for a time, that was enough. That is why this story belongs here. Because what they hide is not about sensational crime. It's about concealment, about the spaces between information, about the gaps where danger can settle unnoticed. Huntley stood under studio lights while the country watched two smiling girls in red shirts. He spoke calmly. He appealed for help, and the truth stood beside him, unseen. That is what unsettles. Not just what happened, but how close it was to visibility, how near it stood to ordinary life. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman left home for sweets on a summer evening. That is where this story truly lives, in the normality, in the trust, in the belief that familiar streets are safe. Legacy is not just reform, it is vigilance. It is the reminder that systems must speak to each other, that warning signs must not be buried, that safeguarding is not bureaucracy, it is protection, and that sometimes the most dangerous things are not hidden in darkness, they're hidden in plain sight. This has been What They Hide, Hidden Crimes in Plain Sight. Stay aware, stay questioning, and remember, not everything hidden is in the dark.